In last week's video, I had a random idea to draft out the best expansion possible, taking one piece from each actual expansion and stitching it together like some kind of game design abomination. It was supposed to be a maybe one day this will be fun to do, but then I actually got to think about it. And here we are. I have devised the rules to a little game that we are going to play today. A game that I thought was going to be easy but turned out to actually require some thought and decisions. A daunting task, I know, but honestly a fun one. I'm quite interested to see what you guys might make out of this idea. What makes an expansion? Well, seeing as there are 10 expansions if you include the War Within, let's set out 10 criteria that needs to be filled. The interesting part of this experiment is that everyone values something different in an expansion. The lists that are going to be created from this are going to be rather different depending on what you like. The 10 criteria needing to be filled are as follows. You're going to need zones, dungeons, raids, a hero class, the main villain of your expansion, the flagship system of your expansion, a fun activity or system that's really there just to be enjoyed, a PvP era, and a pre-patch event. If you don't understand any of the categories, don't worry, I will explain them when we get to it. The important part is that you have to use every expansion to fill each criteria, and you can only use an expansion once. Here's an example. On the topic of a hero class, the options are pretty slim. There have only been 4 classes added to the game since vanilla: Death Knight, Monk, Demon Hunter, and Evoker. Even though I am a Preservation Evoker main, I can live without it. And I just don't feel like Monk lives up to the other 2 options. So in my head, it's between Wrath's Death Knight and Legion's Demon Hunter. In this case, I don't think there has been a better hero class for the game than Death Knight, so that is what I'm going to pick here. Which means for every other category, I cannot use Wrath of the Lich King. See, there's some strategy here. You gotta think about what you're going to give up to pick a specific thing from an expansion. However, seeing as we are trying to make the best expansion with pieces from all the others, not everything is going to fit in the bucket through the square hole. And since this is in hindsight of many expansions, I have devised a little thing I like to call limited power of limitation breaking. Name pending review. With this power, you can change something about your new expansion, namely fixing something about it that you didn't like. But you can only use this power 3 times, and you can't change the fundamental essence of the feature. For example, I have to put Shadowlands somewhere, begrudgingly enough. However, there is an aspect that I thought had great potential and Blizzard just fumbled the ball. So I am picking Torghast for my fun feature category. I really like the idea of a roguelike dungeon mode in World of Warcraft, but not how Blizzard did it. So I am using the limited power of limitation breaking. Name pending review, to make it so that Torghast is not a mandatory feature for anything. It will function more like the Mage Tower in just being a fun side activity that will give cosmetic rewards, as it should have always been. But for some reason, Blizzard decided to lock legendaries behind Torghast, and that was not a very good decision. However, a mistake my expansion will not be making. That takes care of Shadowlands and uses up 1 charge of the limited power of limitation breaking. Name review pending. Now that we got the housekeeping out of the way, we can focus on making the best abomination of an expansion there is. At the end, I will do my best to narrate what my expansion will look like. We can really go at these categories in any order. This is kind of like a draft in a way, though I don't really have any competition, perhaps in the future. However, if you do want to play this with buddies, there'd be an additional rule that you can't repeat what someone else took. For example, if I took Death Knight, you would have to choose a different hero class. You can still pick a different aspect from Wrath of the Lich King, but it just can't be the hero class. With that all out of the way, let's get down to things. Some of these I have no-brainers for, others I had to toil a bit. In fact, the 3 that were the hardest to choose turned out to be the most important aspects of an expansion. I had a couple iterations of the big 3, but I finally settled on the zones, dungeons, and raids that I wanted to go with 2 that in my mind kept swapping over and over which position they were going to be in. But the one that I had locked from around the very beginning are the dungeons. With this pick in the draft, I will be selecting Legion dungeons. Originally, I was going to use Legion elsewhere, but after setting other things in stone, I decided that I needed to focus on a good core. Legion dungeons are a great mix of the new and the old. They were made to be interesting, with good repeatability, and their essences can really be placed anywhere, for the most part. It will make more sense when you see my picks for the zones and the raids. Actually, let's just go over those right now, and I can explain all three of them together. For the zones, I am choosing Draenor, aka Warlords of Draenor leveling, while my raids will be from the Burning Crusade. I narrowed down my WoD choices to two things, either its raids or its zones. Nothing else the expansion offers really stands up to either of these. For a while, I did actually choose the raids, and I had Outland as the zones. Those were the two that I was swapping back and forth. But as I thought more and more about it, the pieces lined up better in my final decision. First off, there are more raids in the Burning Crusade. As good as the raids are in Warlords of Draenor, there just aren't enough of them. I'm choosing the more content aspect here, but especially since I have the limited power, I can change the biggest issue with TBC raiding, the fact that Mount Hyjal exists. Now, actually removing the raid feels like an abuse of the limited power, but ironically, not too far of one. Considering Mount Hyjal really offered nothing in the way of being important to TBC, maybe I could pull some strings and remove it, or I could just fix it by removing the waves mechanic from the raid. That was always what made it so garbage. Instead, it's going to be a normal raid with pathing, bosses, and all that fun stuff. It is still a raid about defending the world tree by going back in time, but its design will be tweaked because it was just flat out flawed. Arguably one of the worst raids they've ever made. Heck, we could keep the wave system and just remove having to start it all over when you fail. Either way, it's going to be vastly improved. Legion, Draenor, and TBC being the core of my expansion fits like a glove. The color of that glove will be changing to no longer be the Burning Legion themed, but I chose these three because they feel like the best building blocks out there. Combine those with the ability to use the vanilla Azeroth world for support, because let's be honest, every good expansion should use the old world for something. I have built a sandbox that allows me to fit the rest of the toys into it, and build my castles wherever I need them. But I need some enemies to actually inhabit those castles, and I have the perfect ones. This is where I am very glad that BFA exists, because we're gonna use Ajara, N'Zoth, and their old god forces as the big baddies for my expansion. I think this works perfectly with everything that I have planned. It ties heavily into the narrative that I'm weaving, which I have decided I'm just going to explain after the next section, because it may not be obvious what I'm going for with all these core blocks, so I want to stitch them together before your very eyes. But before that, I need to cover the big bads with this section and the pre-patch event that will lead to all of this. Sticking with Ajara and N'Zoth, more specifically the latter, his timelessness is going to be key to my expansion. We've seen time and time again, pun intended, that he has visions. He sees all possibilities, all futures and all pasts. I'm gonna make him smarter than he actually was in BFA and change up his grand scheme. N'Zoth is going to realize that the Horde are a problem that stems from the Legion's initial corrupting of the Orcs. So he's going to send Ajara to Draenor to try to make sure that the Orc invasion of Azeroth never happens. But opening the Dark Portal is a pretty big deal, so he's gonna need a distraction, and that is where the pre-patch event comes in. Say hello to good old Deathwing. While he won't be the big bad of this expansion, he will make an appearance as I choose Cataclysm as the pre-patch event. N'Zoth's solution to a distraction will be unleashing Deathwing across Azeroth, causing mayhem, destruction, and buying some time. While the Cataclysm pre-patch wasn't the most involved, I really couldn't fit the expansion elsewhere, and it did fit the narrative I'm trying to build. As I said in the beginning, sacrifices have to be made. Each expansion has to go somewhere. Speaking of the narrative, I've already given a decent idea to what it is, but here's the full thing. After we thwart the attempts of the various powers like Ragnaros, Naxxramas, and especially Cthulhu in Classic, N'Zoth will realize that the problem stems from both the Alliance and the Horde working towards the same goals. While they don't always agree with each other, they are working together in a for the greater good of Azeroth kind of way. So N'Zoth hatches a scheme to get rid of one of them, deciding that if the Horde never invades, then the Alliance alone is too weak to defend the entire world. He sends Ajara to Draenor and uses Deathwing as a distraction to do so, using the help of the infinite dragonflight to send her back in time, or manipulating some bronze dragons. Either works. While in Draenor, Ajara has time to set things in motions to thwart the Legion's attempt to corrupt the Orcs. By the time Azeroth realizes the danger, she's had some time to prepare. The Alliance and Horde decide to team up like in WoD and head to Draenor, finding that Azshara was successful in stopping Magtheridon, who flees to his lair. But seeing an army coming through the portal, Draenor thinks that they are the ones being invaded, and much of the leveling story involves us convincing the Orcs and Draenei that we aren't the enemy here, culminating in the first raid tier, Mount Highjaw, Gruul's lair, and Magtheridon's lair. But what about the Legion dungeons, I hear you say? Well, not all of them will be in at the start of the expansion, but during the other part of the leveling campaign, we will realize that N'Zoth and Azshara are behind all of this, leading to dungeons like the Eye of Azshara, which will be set in Draenor, and the Halls of Valor back in Azeroth, where we seek the aid of Odin. That's how the expansion would start, with other dungeons and raids like Karazhan, which I realize we have both versions of it in this expansion, but that actually works. The entire first patch will be about showing the people of Draenor that the Legion tried to trick them. The Mount Hyjal raid and Karazhan raid will both achieve this by showing the Orcs and the Draenei the destructive power of the Legion, while the two dungeons of Karazhan will be specifically for freeing Medivh's spirit so that he can aid us. I don't want to get too off the rails here, but perhaps I can dedicate an actual video to go over this entire expansion hypothetical. Let me know in the comments if you would want that. This is just a taste of how things would work in my expansion. The big role that the dungeons will play is that I want to use them as a way of collecting the Pillars of Creation. Just instead of using them against the Burning Legion, we use them to stop N'Zoth and Azshara, who eventually corrupt Karabor, turning it into the Black Temple still, just the Eternal Empire kind, not the Legion kind. Again, I can't go over every single detail of the narrative of this expansion, but you hopefully get the gist of it. Now that we have our core, let's go over things like professions really quickly. Let me start off by saying that there are really only a few expansions where professions have shined. I have played the Burning Crusade and Wrath Classic, as well as regular Classic, but that's not an expansion, so it's not pickable. And I gotta say, I don't think professions have ever been as fun as they are now, so I am choosing the Worth in professions. I absolutely love the talent trees and specializations that this system has to offer. It really does feel like you can be a craftsman or a herbalist. Let's not forget the job boards adding an RPG aspect to all of it. It has been fun enough for some people that it's all they do in World of Warcraft. There are legitimately players who only play this game to be the best blacksmith there is, the best alchemist there is, and they actually build a reputation for themselves like real crafters do. Yes, in the classic era you had similar reputations, but that was often built upon someone getting the recipe first because they were lucky, and there was no really good way to search for other crafters. Not to mention, gathering is a decent bit of fun now. You can specialize in gathering quickly or gathering more per node. Perhaps you like getting higher quality ores more often. It's the kind of profession customization that just feels right, which takes the Worthen off the board, and leads me to circle back a bit. Like I said, I love talent trees. If a game has them, it immediately gets some level of interest from me. In this case, I'm sticking with a newer system and choosing Dragonflight talents as my flagship feature. Now, this category can really be anything that was game-changing for an expansion, something that defined it. One of Dragonflight's biggest offers was a return to form, if you will. I personally was disappointed by the mob version of talents. In fact, a big draw to Classic for me was getting to use the talent trees each of the expansions had to offer. I love tinkering. When I play a class, I don't look up guides, I don't look up the builds. My talents are my own. I have builds for classes I don't even play, and when Dragonflight announced the return of actual talent trees, I knew I was going to play the heck out of that expansion, and I did. I put more time into Dragonflight than any other retail expansion since Legion because that's the one I started with. Still not as much time as I put into things like TBC and Wrath Classic, but seeing as I did spend all that time in Classic, I think Dragonflight offers us the best version of talent trees. I don't think I want to use up another charge of my limited power here to tweak it, as part of the issue with this version of talent trees stems from the current class design itself. But I digress. Crossing Dragonflight off the list, let's check the field. It looks like we have everything covered. I can't really think of... Oh right! PvP. Well, we've used everything up but Mr. Pandaria, so Mr. Pandaria PvP, I guess? I personally have never touched PvP in WoW, but from a bit of research I did and the things that I have heard in the past, MoP had the best balancing and good fun mechanics to offer. Whatever the essence of it was, I'll take it for my expansion. If you did PvP during Mr. Pandaria and enjoyed it, let me know why it's in such high regards. And if you would like to see a video of me going through my expansion patch by patch, let me know. It sounds like a fun experiment to follow up this video with. If you enjoyed my hypothetical expansion that uses elements from all the other ones, hit that like button. How does your expansion look? I'm excited to read your ideas. And if you had more ideas of changing up the categories, let me know because I'm sure there's something I missed. My name has been Kale. Have a wonderful journey.